Okay, I think we're live. So, g'day everybody. G'day legends. Thanks for joining me for a special live stream this evening with Dr. Gerald Bassleer. Thanks for joining me.
Hello, Blake. Nice meeting you from a long distance. I'm from Belgium now. It's here 12 o'clock noon time.
Perfect. Yeah, it's really an honor, and I have to say thanks for being so generous with your time. In the lead up, I've done a fair bit of research into you, and I've seen so many great resources and other live streams, which has been really great. So thanks for being generous for your time with myself and with others, and I think that's really great.
Well, thanks for the invitation, because I know these kind of live streams or interviews or communications are worthwhile to spread a message that sometimes the hobbyists are dealing with questions and issues they can't solve. And I like this way, and I'm happy you invite me so I can contribute to the hobbyists in Australia.
Yeah. Let's provide some background for people who perhaps aren't familiar with you yet. And I'd recommend, if you're not, well, get more familiar, because over 40 years of experience with fish diseases and biology. And can you just let us know a little bit about how you got here today? That'd be great.
Okay, thanks for the question, Blake. And well, I have a special history because I graduated as a master in biology in 1977 in Belgium. And I was specialized in behavior of animals and also in behavior of fish. In that time, it was on cichlids, the Tropheus cichlids from Lake Tanganyika, because they had a special behavior. Although I was not a fish hobbyist, but I had the opportunity to start working at a wholesale facility in Antwerp, who had an advertisement put out. We are looking for a biologist. Okay, I'm a biologist. And to be honest, to find in those days a job as a biologist was very difficult. Usually you end up in the pharma industry to be a representative or an agent to sell products to pharmacies or to doctors. That's the main job, or maybe work in a laboratory. But I went to that place that was Aquaria Antwerp. He was one of the major importers in Europe in the 70s. And he said, Gerald, you're biologist number 13 who comes here. And to be honest, you come here and I'm sure you know nothing about fish diseases. I said, no, we learn nothing about that. Even we don't know anything about aquarium, fish keeping. We don't learn it as biologists. That's a hobby. And I'm not familiar with it. Say, what are you coming to do then here? Say, well, I'm looking for a job. I want to make money. I want to start a family. I want to have children. In the 70s, it was normal. You start working, you get married very young, and you just start, everything, the house, the children, the dog, the cat. And he said, well, you know nothing. How are you going to work for me? He said, well, I'm a biologist. And as biologists, we are trained to examine, to investigate. And I know how to use a microscope. So the first thing I did, I went to the library to look for books. What books are available on fish keeping? And I could hardly find anything. That was terrible. That was, maybe on trout and salmon, I could find some old books. That's it. So after a couple of weeks, I asked, the Aquaria Antwerp, the owner, how is it? Are you still looking for a biologist? He said, you're the only biologist to call back. I said, what do you mean? Well, it seems you have more interest than the others. I said, yes, I'm a biologist. It's, for me, challenging to take something up I don't know about. And I like animals, and maybe I like fish. I try it out. He said, well, you can start working for me. Yes, you start. But you're going to have to challenge my wife because she's treating the fish. And I hope you do better than she does. I say, well, I say, okay, well, I know nothing. I say, well, give me a couple of months. I will study about it, what I have to do. And the first thing I learned, I picked up a small book in the hobby industry. Is from Dr. Schubert. He's German. And he wrote a very small book in the 60s, beginning 70s. in German and Dutch on fish diseases. Very small book. And those days, I only could write a letter to him. So I communicated by letter. I said, Dr. Schubert, can you help me? I'm a young biologist. I do this. I want to work in the industry. He said, wow. He wrote a letter back. He says, wow, you're the first biologist who works in the industry. Please come to visit me. I want to learn from you over this. And I share with you my findings. So I was a couple of days at his hometown. I stayed at university. He paid for everything for me. He trained me how to diagnose fish diseases, what I have to do. And the only thing he told me, he says, Gerald, use a microscope. Okay. You can look at the fish. They might have white spots. They might have red wounds. But a microscope tells you what you don't see with the naked eye. And you can identify most of the diseases, most of them. And that's the first thing I did. I'd start examining, looking for the diseases and finding most of the diseases. And I did the challenge with the wife of the owner to see who was the best in treating fish. So I got an aisle and she got another aisle. And we were competing to see how is the mortality and the survival rate. Well, after 3 days, his wife was throwing out of the fish house.
Well, you must have done that.
I had won by long distance ahead. I had hardly any losses. And he was convinced that he need to have a biologist with a microscope who detects the diseases which we are missing with our eyes. See, I even use glasses to see it better, but even that doesn't work.
Admittedly, I need glasses and never wear them, so I'm even worse.
So that's how I arrived in the industry. And then I also started studying. You can see it on my website. I went to study in Scotland, in Venezuela, in America. I went to different professors to get more professional, to get more exchange of information and details. And the best thing was trial and error. Trial and error, like any hobbyist has. Any hobbyist, and I'm sure all your listeners, they did some trials and they made errors. The important thing is learn from it and get better. That's how I made it.
So with that, obviously through your studies, you've been familiar with microscopes, but a general fish keeper, a hobbyist, myself, who's not so familiar, is it still something that you'd recommend learning to do? And how do you get started? What do I just scoop up some water and put it under a microscope, or do I have to, scrape something off the fish, or what to do? And then I assume when I'm looking through the lens, I see some squiggly lines, some dots, maybe something moving around. But how do I actually know what any of that means and if it's good or bad?
Yeah, well, but that question, I thank you for asking that, because this is something everybody is puzzled with. How do I do that? Because there's no real schooling or teaching around these days. And the microscope is only the first thing I say. You have to be interested in it. And I know some hobbyists. Even I know one hobbyist who contacted me this week has 3 goldfish and bought a very expensive microscope to find out if there was a problem, that she could check on the fish what was going on. And just by taking skin scrapings, just scraping some mucus from the fish and taking some gentle scrapings from the gill tissue, you can identify about 90% of fish diseases, because you have to examine on the fish, not in the water.
Okay.
You have to take some tissue from the fish, usually some slime, some coating, and that collects usually bacteria. Mostly it's parasites we can identify. And if a fish is badly sick, well, then you can take some pathological tissues. That's what I do, of course, in my profession.
Right.
And it's practice. It's practicing. It's like learning how to ride a bike. It's the same thing as using a microscope. And for those who want to learn it, I have a YouTube channel with my name on it. And there I have a lot of videos how I examine fish and videos on cases of fish diseases I encountered in the last 3-4 years. I made little videos of it on diseases of guppies or discus or collidoras or cyprinids, your kind of thing. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a specific channel on diseases of cyprinids. So And there you can see what kind of tissues I examined or how diseases look like, and that's something, yes, which is not easy, but you have to find by looking at my channel and by trial and error. It's
Okay.
trial. Yes.
I do see there are a few of my moderators in the chat, so I'm sure multiple resources will come up during this discussion. So if you can, feel free to drop any links down below. Your website as well has so many free resources available, videos, links, even ebooks and pamphlets and things like that. So definitely worth a look as well if you are that way inclined. So actually physically taking that sample, are you just doing that with like I don't know what we call them, paddle pop sticks? I don't know, like a little what do you call those? Like a wooden stick or like a scalpel or something?
Yeah. Well, the first thing simple you can use, in a microscope, you usually have glass plates and you have cover slips.
Yeah.
Even the cover slip, which is very, from a microscope, it has a tiny. Well, I take some. I can show you.
Okay, thanks. While he's doing that, also, oh, sorry.
These are, those kind of little glass plates. That's the cover slip. Yes.
Okay.
And that's a little glass plate you take out, and one. Right?
Yeah, like and squish it between the two things, right?
Yes, and that you have the fish, and you take a scraping from the skin.
Right. Okay.
Like this,
okay.
and then you put it on a glass plate with some water from the aquarium here, and that you examine.
Okay.
And that you examine, and you can take that from the gills if it's a big fish. Usually I diagnose fish which are dying, which are, and you have an aquarium with 100 fish, let's say 100 danio or cyprinids, and one is dying. You should take that one out because he's showing and he's talking to you with his body language. I'm feeling bad. I'm suffering. I might have red lesions. Take me out so you can save my 99 friends which are left over in the aquarium.
Yeah.
The longer you wait, the worse it can get with disease, because this one fish should be sacrificed for examination if you have a microscope. And just by taking that scraping, I put it on a glass plate and taking some gill tissue and the fish is dead, you take it out, and that really, I tell you, that can tell you what kind of medications you use. Otherwise you're guessing. Otherwise you continue to be guessing, except for certain diseases which are noticeable, like a white spot disease or sometimes oodinium or velvet disease, that you sometimes can notice with the naked eye. But still, I prefer to use a microscope because it's my hobby and it's my profession.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you use the tools that you're accustomed to using, right? So that makes sense.
Of course, you can also use a scalpel. I have a dissection material. I have a whole a test kit I can show you, because what you need is like a whole test. I know people like to see the material that I'm using.
Yeah, fancy.
See, this is what I use. I have scissors and a scalpel. A large scissor is for a big fish. A small scissor, it's for small fish, cutting off the material. So that's my toolkit I travel with in the work. Of course, I'm with my microscope.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good to know. And speaking of resources, you've released a book as well with a lot of photos of diseases and what to look for. So that could be another good research if you are looking into that.
And I have one book which has a DVD-ROM. Well, that's old-fashioned product these days. But in that DVD-ROM, there are videos. And there are videos on how the parasite looks like in a microscope. And that's, you need to learn to identify. So once you've seen it, you recognize it next time when you use your microscope. And I also have this available on my ebooks with videos in it. So I have different choices for the hobbyist or the professional to look at some published materials next to my YouTube channel, of course.
Cam from the Fish Room's a big fan, says best book in the business. So
Okay,
well
nice
done.
to hear that. Thanks.
It's probably a good time to mention as well. I am periodically keeping an eye on the chat, so feel free to put questions in there if you'd like me to ask them. I have a bunch of questions of my own, but I certainly have some from people that commented on the short video that I did previewing or introing today's discussion. So yeah, feel free to drop in the comments whatever you have been itching to know. But I think it's interesting because you seem to have your own unique way of doing things. For example, we touched on biology leading into fish diseases, leading into fish keeping yourself, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But by the same token, we get to this that I've been trying, the food box bio fish food, and of course we have to discuss that today. And from what I understand, you sort of, again, most people just like, oh, I need something to give my fish, I'll create a fish food. Well, not most people, but the people that do that. But you, I think, is this true? You thought fish diseases, how do we stop these diseases without just dumping medication in the tank? We'll create a good food that will help ward off those sorts of things, right? So that's something unique as well, I thought.
Yeah, well, thanks for Blake for bringing that up, because in the time in the 90s, I started my own fish house in Belgium. And if you have a fish house and in 1,000 aquaria, tropical fish, imported from all over the world, to specialize, to distribute to the pet shops, mostly in Belgium and France. And the only thing you want to do as a businessman, in those days I was a biologist and I became a businessman, is to make money, to make a living.
It helps.
it helps. And you only make a living on healthy fish. All the fish that died, there's a big loss. It's a big loss of net profit. And I've seen companies going broke. They had the largest, I've seen in Florida, the largest fish farm I've ever seen in my life. And I told the manager or the owner of the farm, how are you going to manage that farm? Yes, I go look around the farm every day. He said, what do you mean? Yes, I walk around and at the end of the day, I've seen all the tanks. I say, I mean, you go only once a day and then you might have seen it all. Yes. Well, he was broke within 2 years because you need time to look where are the problems and how can you prevent that the fish get sick. And that my only goal, if you have running a business with fish, is that you want to maximize your sales with healthy fish without complaints, and that you don't have any losses because a fish is a valuable product. And these days, we should be concerned about the well-being of the fish. We learned that from the 70s now to the year 2024, that well-being of an animal is getting more important. And that was always my concern. Started as a biologist. Yes, you trade in fish, you keep fish, and you give people a job with the fish. I had 15 people working for me, and I told all my staff, those fish you have to keep alive because they pay for your salary. And if you keep them alive, you give them a good life, they have a good well-being. So you have a good combination. You make a salary of a fish which is healthy and happy. And that came up with the idea for me, how can I do it? And I learned good food was for me the prevention of diseases. That was the main goal, is preventing treatments, preventing use of medications. It's a high cost. If a fish is sick, it's sitting there maybe for a week. And every day the aquarium cost me 3 to 4 euros at expenses of heating, water, staff. So all those costs I could cut was giving me a better profit, but at the same time a healthier fish. And that's why I start studying fish food. I never did that before. I started in the 90s to look for, well, what kind of food or what kind of additional products you can add to the food that gives a good benefit to the health of the fish and prevent that it becomes sick. That was about the main issues that I was concentrated on.
Yeah, it's a great point because, if not to commoditize fish or anything, but if your business was selling, anything that, like these Sharpies, but you had 10 of them dropping off the floor, melting into a puddle every day, you wouldn't just keep going with that, would you? So you'd look into ways to stop that happening. And so both fish loss is expensive, fish medication is also expensive, and you're going to have a more vibrant, more lively product at the end of the day that people will be happier with. So it does make a lot of sense. There are ingredients, like with the fish, the food box in particular. I'll, in case people aren't aware, because I wasn't until Johan from DRP Aquatics Australia.com.au sent me these. So there's 4 foods in the box. One is I might not point to the exact one because I'm doing it backwards, but there's a garlic, a chlorella, an acai, and a regular. Is that the terminology? Yeah, regular. So even with the other stuff that is in the box, there's more resources again about which foods to feed when. How do you find all these ingredients? To get to acai, did you have to try every berry in the world? Or because I don't imagine acai are falling into every waterway in the world. So how do you know what's actually going to be good for the fish?
Well, a lot of studies have been done in aquaculture industry for food fish. So I have a lot of contacts. I do a lot of reading and research, particularly the people who are breeding fish, are keeping fish in poor countries, because a lot of fish farming goes on in poor countries. They cannot buy antibiotics. It's too expensive. They cannot lose fish. So a lot goes back to the old way of Chinese herbal medicine. Is using the herbs from nature, like garlic. Garlic is a healthy product, or other products. And now when you mentioned the acai, which is a berry that grows in a palm tree at the Amazon. And I did 3 expeditions in the Amazon. I did 2 of them with the University of Amazonas to study fish and to talk with fishermen. And we came one day across a certain part of the river where a fisherman was collecting ruminos and cardinal tetras in splendid colors. And we asked the guy, he said, how come you have better colored fish and healthier fish than your other fishermen, which are on other part fishing on other parts of the river? He said, dive into the water, look into the water and see what happens. And that will tell you. And we go into the water and we saw that the fish were eating little berries, acai berries, red berries. And the acai gives some power to the fish, strength, helps immunity, particularly gives fantastic red and blue colors. So that it's a combination. It's a fruit. Like eating fruit for humans is healthy. We know fruits are a good benefit for our human health. But I didn't expect that a fish would eat fruit. That was for us. So I start testing, putting fruit powder from the acai berry into the fish food. And we did some testing. We had amazing results. Nobody had done it in the aquarium industry, but the fish know it from nature. So you're trying to learn from fish in nature, how they live, how they eat. And that teach you a lesson you can put in practice for the aquarium hobby. And that's how the acai came into our Dr. Bassleer Biofish food products.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many ingredients, like thyme was one, garlic, grapefruit seed extract. Can't even say that.
Yes,
aloe vera, and lepacho. I wanted to ask about. You have 2 foods. Lepacho is one, and the other one is matrine, and those ones are recommended for if a fish, matrine if it has white spot, or Lapacho if it's showing signs of hole in the head, I believe, hexamina. What are those medicated foods, or are they have ingredients that in particular help with resistance to those kind of things?
Okay, thanks question, Blake, because a lot of people think we're putting medications in the food. Well, they're not medications. No. When those fish have white spot or they have spironucleus hexamida infections, particularly with the Lapacho, you still have to use a medication because the medication kills the parasite. That's what's the meaning of it. The fish food helps the fish to repair, helps the fish to fight off, but not to medicate. Because when a fish is treated with a medication against white spot, for example, well, you kill the white spot, but the white spot made little wounds and lesions, or the white spot can come back later on the fish. And the fish feed are meant to that the fish survives better, repairs much faster, cures much easier. And the matrine is particularly to make a kind of repellent in the mucus. It changes a little bit the content of the mucus, so the parasite, like white spot, we also suspect, or we had some testing against oodinium or velvet disease. The parasites don't like to come on the fish anymore. And the Lapacho is an old product used by the old Amazon Indians to control parasitic infections in the gut. So it's a kind of herbal medication, although it's something that just makes that the parasite don't likes to be there. That's it. It just and if you create an environment in the fish, like in the gut with Lapacho, that the parasite doesn't like to be there, well, it automatically the parasite is gone. And at the same time, Lapacho cures the fish, and we're adding in some immunostimulants to repair the gut system, and these all together helps the fish to repair and to cure, because the fish must cure itself next to you adding the medicine. And that sometimes goes wrong when people just adding a medicine and they see, oh, my fish, I treated it with egg and still he doesn't do well, he dies. Yeah. Well, it means that the fish was properly treated, but not taken care of, that he could take care of his repair, his body, and he's taken up his vitamins and minerals, all different things, because the fish must take that personal action. And you can help with that. And that's why the food came into action. In my planning,
that makes sense. So you can still feed those foods even if the fish aren't sick, and the intention is to feed them in conjunction with medicine, kind of like chicken noodle soup or a nice something nice and hearty if you've got the flu, kind of.
Well, so I know some breeders and people in the industry use my fish feed as a prevention, particularly the fish like angelfish or discus that are susceptible to the hexamida or spironucleus parasites, and then secondary the hole in the head disease. They use it as a prevention, as a 10-day fish food treatment, you can say. It's not a treatment, it's just a care way of helping the fish to defend themselves. That's the main thing. And that's why I explained that. I have on my website also an indication on a leaflet what kind of food you can use for what kind of problem and for how long. So I have a special leaflet on that available in 4 languages on my website.
Yeah, it's a good point. I do have a couple of questions here. I noticed there is one in the range that contains CBD, which even humans take for sort of relaxation purposes, and I imagine it's similar with the fish. Kind of, have you had any backlash? I know it's probably more commonplace now, but have people been a bit funny about that? I guess you see it more and more with dogs and cats as well, I guess. But just how's the reception been to that, and how was the research and yeah, can you just elaborate on how that came to be?
Well, the CBD is one of the last new produced fish food organized by the company in Germany. Because I'm not producing myself anymore. They take over some good ideas. They learn from dog and cat industry. Yes, it's an industrial product. And the CBD, some studies have been done on that in fish. I believe it was tilapia, cichlids, that it calmed down the fish during aggressive stages, or after moving the fish from one tank to another, or after a disease. So to give the fish a more, how can I say, relaxed feeling. Is that what I can say about the CBD product? And that seems to be a help for this kind of situation, particularly when you have keeping cichlids and you introduce a new cichlid to a nice established tank, and sometimes aggression occurs. Yes, they are cichlids. That's typical for that fish.
Yeah.
And before they establish a kind of living together in a good community, the CBD, for example, could help to overcome those aggressive issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess the important distinction is that CBD doesn't equal THC, so there's no need to put any Bob Marley on in the fish room while you feed that out.
I'll play some Bob Marley in the room. The fish might be like it.
I tell you, I think my female epistogramma Hongslow could do with a bit of that sometimes. She gets a bit nasty sometimes, but
that means she's healthy. That means she is healthy. That's a good sign.
So there's some really good chat. So thanks so much for getting that. I'll cover a few more of those before they go too far down. So Anthony was wondering, how can we purchase your book in Australia? I'm an animal and vet bioscience student who is confused about what I should do after uni. I think I have found a possible calling. Well, yeah, that's kind of go towards the jobs, I guess, might be the recommendation. But correct me if I'm wrong, your books are also available as ebooks or not? Some of them are.
Yes. You can see it on my website. I have different links to that where you can purchase the books, and they're also available as ebooks. Yes.
Yeah. So definitely check out the Dr. Bassleer website. I'll drop it in the comments or the description after this, regardless.
Yeah.
Richie has mentioned he's never seen a fish that won't eat your fish food. It's amazing, even picky discus. Yeah, and a very, very small thing, but I love the little spoon that comes with it. It just makes things so handy. But one thing I was going to talk about is in the information you mentioned that that granules are your preferred food substance to feed, over flakes, pellets that are probably maybe a bit more common than granules. So can you run us through what in particular you like about granules? Not that I disagree or agree. I just am interested to hear, in your experience, why.
Well, the granulates, you have to look at the way food is processed. I don't say flake foods are bad. No. The problem is with flake foods, they float. So who's going to eat the flake food? The one who's getting it first. And sometimes the flake food floats right away back into the filter or the overflow, anything. Well, it can sink, of course. The disadvantage with flake foods, what I see, is they have to be going through a very hot process of production and losing some quality of food. And with the granulate food, we know you can choose the granulate size. So you have different sizes of fish food that fit certain kind of fish. Some fish like to eat very small granulates, and some fish like to play with large granulates of fish, like particularly the cichlids. And the cyprinids, they like small granulate food. The medium size they particularly will like. And the advantages of the granulate, the way food is produced into a granulate is in the experience of all aquaculture. Aquaculture of fish is the biggest, where the money goes to for investment. And they find out through research and investment that producing a granulate food is the best way to produce quality in the food. And to adding on the essential, how can I say, nutrients, also the vitamins and the minerals, and to put it in a compact product that is very well digested.
Mm.
So if you see the result of feeding with Dr. Bassleer biofish food, for example, you will see the fish have very little waste because it's maximized, consumed, and absorbed by the fish. And with the granulates, we had the advantage that after the production of the granulate, it cools down.
Mm.
And then we're adding on the nutricaments, the garlic, the lapacho, the thyme, or the matrine, you can call it, all those products after the production, because during the production, you cannot put it on because it would destroy the beneficial elements of those nutricaments.
Mm.
So that's why we're adding them on. That's why you can see it sometimes in your hands or floating in the tank, particularly the herbal. You can see the herbs sometimes attached and floating into the water. But the fish love it. You'll be surprised of the fish go for those little flaky herbals that still float next to the ones which are still attached to the granulate. So that combination, a perfect little ball of food which has all the balanced ingredients, and then adding on the nutricaments, it's what I liked in the practice of fish feeding for ornamental fish.
And my sort of non-scientific opinion on that is I think it's a good idea to have the varying sizes that you get with the granule. Like with pellets, sometimes you just want a little extra nibble of whatever you're eating. But if you only have pellets that are this size compared to your mouth and you have to eat another one every single time, then it's no wonder that we see quite a lot of bloat and indigestion going on these days. So, sometimes you just need a little extra nibble, a little afternoon snack. So
we see the cases, particularly with the fancy goldfish, that eating flake foods, that they turn upside down because they digest or they take up a lot of air. They take a lot of air because they're at the surface eating those flakes, and those fancy goldfish have a deformed swim bladder, and that they can't control the extra air they have been taken up. That gives them that upside down swimming behavior. But it can also happen with ornamental fish, not that often, but particularly fish with having a problem internally. And I see, well, I don't say flake foods are bad, but if there is something better, I would say you go for the granulates.
That's a good point, and it leads into another thing I was going to ask, because I noticed that the larger the granule size gets, it's designed to sink faster, correct? And I like that, because often a lot of small fish, they will prefer to feed mid-water, but then it does stop the larger fish from doing that gulping action, which is pretty unnatural when you think that a large fish is most likely not going to be too fussed about predation and things like that, but apart from birds, right? So they're going to stay down the bottom of the water and be the boss down there. So why would they come and learn how to eat properly off the surface?
Yeah, normally we teach our fish to eat at the surface because of the aquarium. That's the Pavlov effect, the Pavlov effect, that even if you come to the aquarium, the fish come to the surface, of course. That's where the food enters. And normally in nature, food doesn't enter from the surface. Food is inside the water. It's floating into the water. So the fish search all day in the water. And if you have granulates, particularly the small ones, they float into the water and they sink slowly. So the fish getting used to something that is natural, that is common. And eating at the surface, hardly any fish, well, there's a few exceptions, like the butterfly pantodon of Africa, which is, or the toxotes. There are some exceptions, but the exceptions prove the rule, that the food is normally somewhere floating in the water or laying on the bottom. If you go swimming with fish in the ocean, look in the ocean or in the rivers, fish permanently look at the bottom or on between the plants or on the rocks for food. That's permanently all day long, like cows graze in the farmland. That's fish graze onto their habitat where they're living from.
That is a good segue as well, because any of the Dr. Bassleer range of biofish food can be fed to either marine or freshwater fish, correct? Was there ever any like in the beginning, did you have a different range for marine and a different range for freshwater, or just often you see with fish foods that they create a separate distinction in those two things?
No, because the fish needs a basic ingredient. That's the proteins.
Yeah.
They need the proteins to live the vrofra and the good digestible proteins. And the proteins which are in our Dr. Bassleer Bife food are from marine fish.
Mm.
Like we like to eat marine fish. We all prefer to eat marine fish above freshwater fish. Why? It tastes better. It has a better quality food inside it in most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And just for the marine fish, you better add some extra algae, and that's why we made the chlorella, for instance, is the one which is mostly used for the marine fish. It's because they eat a lot of algae in nature, most of the marine fish. But anyway, it doesn't make a choice. It's like mankind living where else all over in the world. We also always have nearly the same kind of mixture of food we need to have. And it's the same for fish. Also doesn't matter where they live.
That makes sense. Okay, I've got a question here from Bob. Can you ask? Yeah, of course. Bob is a massive Corydora man. He pretty much exclusively lives for Corys. So he's wondering about your recommendation in particular for Corys. What would you feed? And actually, if I can piggyback off that question, Bob, I'm sure you won't mind. With the range of fish foods, is the intention to alternate, one per day, or is that, should you go like, double the amount of garlic versus chlorella, or it's 1-1-1, or how's the best schedule for those sorts of things?
Well, there is never a perfect rule.
Yeah.
The only thing I give as advice when fish have certain problems, or you to prevent that you feed a certain food like garlic, that you feed only the garlic during 10 days, so the fish take up a lot of garlic, because the garlic you need to make its positive action for the fish. And that's why we made that food box, is the idea that you could alternate. Like the regular is, you can feed all day, doesn't matter. But then you want to give the acai, well, you might alternate with the acai because it gives some extra color. But when you talk about the garlic, you want to give it like a garlic treatment. I don't like to call it a treatment, but it's like a garlic potential helping the fish in overcoming, particularly our Corydora cats, which are commonly having worm infections or bacterial problems. They like to eat at the bottom of the aquarium. And where are most of the bacteria and the parasites? On the bottom of the aquarium. That's why Corydoras are so susceptible, because they can easily come in contact with those possible pathogens. And that's why, for example, we recommend like garlic for Corydora catfish. But we like to have a recommendation of the mix of foods, because we like to have different feed every day. We don't want to eat every day McDonald's or any other hamburger. Maybe you can
you
try.
asked me a year ago, perhaps.
But you can eat it. But always we recommend, we all do. We are mankind. We like to have a diversity, and every day we want to have a different meal, in the morning, in the evening. It's the same for the fish. So if you alternate, the fish will be more happier to have a different taste, different flavor. And that's why the food box came into the picture, so people get to know, well, use different feed. Don't stay always with the same. Give the fish some pleasure in life.
Yeah. That's I'm really happy with that, because I was just alternating the 4, but that makes sense. It probably is best to go, for example, regular chlorella acai, regular chlorella acai, and then garlic. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll change.
I have on my website a leaflet which tells when you feed garlic, how long you should use it and for what purpose. And I also have on that PDF on my website, also selling for Corydora cats or catfish, what would be the 3 or 4 most recommendable, for example.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's just recommendable. It's not always perfect. That's the thing. Perfect is very difficult. Depends on the kind of corridora, also.
True. Well, he does have a pretty nice collection of cories. So, okay. Let me just check quickly. Andre saying he's fed aloe and chlorella to battle scarred fish, and they've healed within a week. So that's great. Janik uses acai and garlic. All his fish love it. Perfect. Cool. And Richie said, I got lucky, perhaps, but I was advised a few years ago to apply a honey-based gel to the discus for hole in the head, and it worked. Any medical evidence why that worked, or just luck? I don't know. Would you have any opinion on what? Maybe just a bit of a sort of a band-aid, an elastic bandage?
Honey has some essential products which could be helpful, and particularly it could have helped, the repair of the microflora, the gut flora, so the fish build up its immunity, because honey is a very healthy food for mankind, and some people might have had success with fish. Unfortunately, we cannot put it in our biofish food. It would make the biofish food bad within 2-3 months, so it would not be possible. But look, that is an experience from somebody who tried it, and that's worthwhile to look at it, not to disregard it, and to look at it as another opportunity. In that case, that it helped. That's all we want. We want to have result. And see, science is never settled. We will always continue to learn as long as we're open to discuss it and to put it in practice. And that will teach us eventually that maybe the people looking here at the opportunity that this hobbyist used the honey, some people might have tried it also and had say, well, why not? Yes, I cannot disagree.
I'm interested now. We sort of touched on it earlier about your journey through and establishing your fish house. I'm interested in to know what species you fell into in particular. Do you still keep any now? I know that you've sort of downsized a little bit, and you're often traveling. So, what's your hobby look like now?
Well, my hobby is I'm a fish doctor. So I have the lucky thing. I just was last week in Sweden, and because I had opportunity. My son lives and works in Sweden. He is engaged with a Swedish girl, and so a big company in Sweden, which is the largest importer in whole Scandinavia, said, Gerald, please train our staff. We want to be more professional in fish keeping. We want to use more the microscope. So I went there for 2 days, and I had the opportunity to see 4,000 aquaria. So that gives me the chance to have only one aquarium,
Perfect.
which is now getting a little bit algae growing on the tank. And those fish are the ones which I collected from my laboratory, which were always involved in getting the taste of new kind of fish food. But I'm breeding guppies. They're breeding automatically. I have cardinals. I have algae eaters, Epalzoringus. I have ruminos. I have some Daimyo Chiati. Chiati in it, yes. They're a little bit aggressive, They like to eat on the tails of my guppies. Well, but it's a mix of fish because I'm too much gone. I'm 6 months a year. I'm not here. So there's an automatic feeder standing on it. Of course, they're getting biofish food.
well, when the fish house was at peak power, did you find because obviously you had the thirst for knowledge, like you can tell that you've got a bit of a thirst for knowledge and you like to go and problem solve, and did you find yourself going through rabbit holes with the hobby? Like, did you go, oh, I've just newly discovered cories now, and I'm going to go and keep 1,000 different types of cories, or I really like live bearers, or whatever it is. Did you have that journey when you were picking up the hobby?
Yeah, well, usually I was never a hobbyist, and I came in and fell in love with it by keeping the fish myself and to see what I would keep. the thing I learned is listening to my customers in that time, what was interesting for them.
Yeah.
And that teach me lessons what kind of fish I would bring into my fish house. And then you sometimes come around very rare corridoras. I remember in the 80s, I think it was the 80s, we received the first Corridora barbatus. The barbatus. Well, now it has a different name. It doesn't call corridoras anymore. Don't ask me how to pronounce the new names because they're changing all those names of those fish. Well, hard to keep up. So the barbatus was at the time very new, but I love it because of specific color, particularly the big ones. They had some black inside, and then of course that's you want to keep yourself because then you see something special coming up, and that you fell in love with that kind of fish because you see it, and that's why a hobbyist. What does a hobbyist do? Is he going to read a book to find out what fish he likes? No, when he sees it.
Yeah.
And he sees it swimming in a pet shop or with a friend or on your YouTube channel. Maybe he sees some of your cyprinids. He says, wow, I want to have this. And that's how it usually works. It's falling in love with something you like.
Well, that's why I was interested because, most people find the hobby going to a pet shop and there might be 8 different species, especially if you go to a big box store or like one of the sort of bricks and, the cat, dog, and fish are over in the corner, those kind of stores. Yeah. There's not many to choose from, but I guess you were already exposed to so many different types and you kind of had it, again, a little bit upside down to how most people do. So I was wondering, were you taken to color, taken to things that are unique or, that's the reason I was asking.
Yeah, it's a kind of mix because you have so many different kind of, how can I say, as a businessman, I had to buy all different kinds because to fill in all the different tastes. And if you see in Asia, like in China, people like to keep very big, large monster fish.
Yeah.
I'm sure in Australia, there are hobbyists who like to keep large monster fish, or snakeheads, polypterus, large cichlids, talk about it. That's there's so many choices we have in the market, and that's it's your personal taste that would fill in.
And part of me, I was wondering as well if people say, oh, these fish are so sensitive. Discus, German blue rams, they're probably the 2 most common ones. And I was wondering if part of you was like, oh, everybody has a lot of problems with those 2 fish. Those are the fish that I'm going to go get, and I'm going to figure it out and make it easy for everybody else. That's what I thought you might do.
Yes, that's part of it. Yeah, sometimes challenging to get the fish in which others cannot keep alive, or other ones have a difficulty to bring in. And I remember in the 90s, I specialized in wild fish from the Amazon or from Asia or from Africa, because a regular pet shop who was receiving fish transshipping, in boxes, closed boxes, and they put it in the tanks, they had difficulties to keep those alive. So if you specialize in that, people come to you and say, wow, you can keep it alive and give it healthy to me. And that's, certainly a challenge that we took up to get a big part of the market.
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting. Brendan is asking, what are the best practices to prevent disease outbreaks and some common misconceptions about diseases and their treatments? And this, I think, leads into one of your philosophies, which I certainly agree with, which is, preventative medication. And I don't believe in that at all, and I don't believe that you do.
No.
Yeah.
A medication is to kill a parasite, and when there is no parasite, or you don't know, why are you going to put a medication? And that goes quite often wrong, particularly on people keeping discus. You just mentioned discus, that people treat every month, for 7 days with metronidazole or against pyronucleus or hexameta, or they're putting fluke medications in it for a couple of days every month. Yeah, is there a fluke? Well, my thinking, I have a holistic view. You always have to ask, where does the parasite come from? Why is he there? Why does it become an infection? Because in nature, there are always pathogens, there are always microbes. But you have to look, why does the fish get diseased? And that's why, to answer that question, first of all, you have to check if all the conditions are good, how you keep the fish. Did you do a water check? Did you do water maintenance and a filter maintenance? That doesn't mean you have to do a lot of water changes. Some people hardly do any water changes because they have a good biological filtration. They have a lot of plants. That avoids a lot of water changes because that controls the healthy system. But do you do a maintenance of the biological filter? What kind of food are you giving? And I see a lot of problems happening where people are feeding live or frozen food, that you're adding pathogens to the fish in the frozen and live food. There's a risk of feeding pathogens or microbes, which is a risk for fish. So you have to look altogether. My fish is getting sick. Why? Always ask yourself the question, why does he get sick? What goes wrong here? Maybe a new fish introduced, we didn't have quarantine and brought in a disease. It's possible, yes. So for certain people, I recommend, particularly the discus people or people who have a large, beautiful community tank and they want to introduce a new fish, better keep it in quarantine for about 7 to 14 days in the same type of water which you have in your home tank before you introduce it, or you buy it from a reliable aquarium shop which had it in quarantine, and you can see the fish has been eating, he didn't develop any diseases, he had it also for at least 1 week or 40 days. So that's all important preventative ways that you can avoid these problems. But the main thing is always ask yourself the question, why do the disease attacks my fish and gets to my fish? What could have been the cause? And then 50% of the cases, you don't need to add a medication, really not. You're just changing your way of working or thinking.
And one thing, it's just fresh in my mind because I was helping someone on the weekend with this. Their partner, who usually has, it's their aquariums, it was feeling is going through some health battles. So she was performing the maintenance on the tanks. And I said, just have a look at all the fish first, see if any of them are swimming a bit strange or anything like that. And she mentioned that one of the discus did have a bit of a white dorsal fin. So I said, look, just to be on the safe side, don't do that tank first, do that tank last, because if you put the hose in that tank and then you move that hose to every other tank, well, you might spread it around. But at least if you do it last, you can allow the hose to dry and hopefully, it's a bit low risk then. So that's just a perspective that I have from the weekend, just things like that,
Yeah,
maybe
it's thinking biosecurity, that it's like in the hospital, you don't get a syringe from your patient next to you. You got another syringe, hopefully.
Yeah. And
that's you have to think with the nets. If you have nets, use one net to a tank or put it in a disinfection bucket, or the best way is washing it under hot water.
Yeah. I was just going to say, how many people scoop the duckweed from every single tank on duckweed day?
The net is the worst spreader of fish diseases when you have several tanks. Yes, it is.
Even if you don't have lids on your tanks and you scoop the duckweed out of one tank and then, I bang it on the bucket, to get the duckweed out, water's splashing everywhere, So if you don't have a lid, it's very possible that some of that water's in your other tanks anyway.
It's a risk, but still you have to think, how many pathogens or microbes have an opportunity to cause an infection on the fish in those few droplets. And it all has to do, we learned that from the recent COVID-19 experience. If you have good immunity and you take care of yourself and you take care of your fish and they're strong and healthy, they can fight off the few microbes. Only when there is a few or spreading around, and there are always going to be microbes, and a few drops, it's not a big risk. except when the fish are in a risky condition with a pure immunity system,
Yeah.
a pure a lack of vitamins, a lack of essential nutrients. Then, of course, the microbe can, or the pathogen can take over, well, the health of the fish. It can become an invading parasite or bacteria. And it all has to do how the fish is, except when there's a lot of pathogens introduced, and a large amount of white spot disease introduced by new introduced fish. Yes, even the healthy fish might have more risk to show some white spots. Yes, it all has to do with the quantity of contact you have. Yes.
In your experience, is there the same amount of risk or greater risk in one of these if we're talking about some water getting from tank to tank, or actual contact, like an infected fish going tank to tank if you take one out and put it in, or even something like I think about deworming and the substrate. Like if you took a scoop of substrate, put it in tank to tank. In your opinion, in your experience, does one of those three practices have more risk than others, or pretty similar? Or what do you think about that?
Well, the largest risk is with a fish net. When you catch a sick fish, you have the contact of the slime and the skin of possible sick fish in the net. And then you go with the same net to catch other fish. You got again that direct contact of the slime, the skin with the net, with possible a bunch of pathogens. So you introduce it inside the mucus of the fish. So that is the largest risk, is a fish net catching sick fish from different tanks and go around and catching also healthy fish, well, in contact with the slime that potential carries the pathogens. That's the largest, in the substrate. Well, usually in the substrate there are aerobic and anaerobic bacteria that eats the pathogens, except worm eggs. Worm eggs can survive those aerobic or anaerobic bacteria, which are part of biological filter, which is in your substrate. So a parasite can hardly survive there. Also in the water, there is a small content of pathogens in the water. It's small. The main content of pathogens is on the fish or inside the fish. That's the main thing you have to worry about, and that's why the fish net plays the most important role.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Andre was asking as well about Bacto Sprint. I've actually used it too. I put it in the well, if people have seen the video of the sort of planted tower that I recently did, that tank I started up with Bacto Sprint. Can you tell us about how that came to be and how it differs from other instant cycle in a bottle kind of products?
Well, Bacto Sprint is a product from Aquarium Münster, and they received it after some research was done at the university, I think it was in Switzerland, where they find out that if you keep a kind of freeze-dried bacteria in a capsule and you add it to a solution with a nutrient, well, bacteria need food. And as soon as you give good food to those bacteria, they start to grow and explode in quantities. And that's what happens when you use in the Bacto Sprint. You screw it open, and the bacteria fall into that content. You shake it. Well, you open the bottle after a couple of minutes, you hear the gas produced by the bacteria. So it's a complete directly active bacteria content you add to the water. But the bacteria needs food. So if you put it in the aquarium without any food, well, the bacteria have not such a nice time. They need food to have a good time. So you have to introduce the aquarium and put a few fish so to keep that culture of bacteria going and growing. It still needs time. You cannot put that Bacto Sprint in a tank of 1,000 liters with 1,000 fish. It will not do the job immediately. It might take a couple of weeks before that culture of bacteria grows efficiently. And a lot of people think all those magic filter starters, I just put it in and it will work.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
these are live organisms who need to adapt to the system which they are introduced. So in the beginning, you introduce it slowly and take your time. Don't overhaste or put too many fish. So let the bacteria adapt to the quantity of fish. That's how it should be. So in the beginning, you put bacteria, and then you slowly increase the quantity of fish. So the bacteria learn to consume that quantity of waste. That's all what it is. It's a teaching tool. And the best way, I still want aquariums to sell back to sprint, but the best way to start a aquarium, when you have different aquarium like you have standing in the back there, Blake, you take just some sponge or some filter material and put it in the new tank. You're transplanting a heart, and the heart that's the best bacteria. There's hardly any disease in there in that filter because the bacteria eats the pathogens. The pathogen only survives on the fish, except worm eggs, because they're in an egg. But the bacteria usually devour all the pathogens like white spots or costia or even live worms. They cannot survive in that filter. They have to survive on the fish. So that little sponge, so that part is a perfect way to start in the best and a very fast way to introduce billions of bacteria in your new biological filter.
That's good to know. I hadn't really thought about that. So I was wondering, all this stuff about cross-contamination and nets, does it go out the window if you're starting every aquarium with a squeeze of sponge? I can't remember what Eric Bodrock calls it, sponge gunk or something. He had a funny name for it anyway.
Well, of course, you don't take a sponge out of an aquarium which has diseased fish. That's of course, you avoid all risks. You take it out of a healthy tank, a part of the sponge, or you cut off a part of your biological filter. It can also be ceramic balls or plastic balls, anything which has your original biological filter that's be working. You're making great bacteria in the back there permanently every day. You have it swimming.
Well, I haven't got any fish in there yet, so I don't know if it works or not yet, but I can tell you definitely feel like James Bond when you're breaking the thing open and shaking it up.
Yeah.
So that's an experience in itself.
Yeah, that's what people like, to have that really hands-on tool.
Makes you feel like you've accomplished something, especially if you've got to wait a few weeks anyway.
Yeah.
Anthony is wondering about diseases such as columnaris, very tricky one to diagnose, to treat. Prior to medicated quarantine, I was losing many fish from shops due to columnaris. I feel the medication is excessive, but had worked. Any tips?
Well, columnaris is a tropical bacteria which likes warm water. And particularly this is a problem in summer when it's too hot in the pet shops or in the home aquarium, particularly when you live in warmer areas. The bacteria loves temperatures above 24 degrees. So if you cool down the aquarium to 22, 23, it cuts the growth of the bacteria. It will not grow anymore. It will still sit on the fish, but it will not become a more invasive infection. It will stay an infection. And that's the time when you can add on salt. Salt, 3 to 5 grams per liter, is a very good way of, in freshwater aquaria, to control columnaris outbreaks. Cooling water and salt you can use as an immediate tool to control the explosion of columnaris, because the columnaris, and that's why it's so devastating, goes very fast. Within 24 hours, 48 hours, all the fish are wiped out. But if you do a water change with some cooler water and adding salt, it stops that explosion of bacteria, and that at that moment you can use an antibacterial product. And the pet shops has some antibacterial products or an antibiotic if you can get from a veterinarian, because it's a bacteria. You have to use a product to kill it. The salt doesn't kill it. The cold water doesn't kill it. You need to apply a medication to kill it. So that's the main thing you really have to be concerned about. to do that.
I think it's important as well to hear your recommendation for salt, because often you hear salt being recommended from people like myself, you know, your backyard person who's just bought some fish one day, and then, you know, I don't really have any sort of basis in science. It's just kind of fish room experience or what have you. So it's good to hear that there is also a scientific basis for salt as a treatment or a therapeutic benefit.
Well, Blake, your experience is little science. Think about it. Don't disregard that, because what works for you is your science. It's your home science, and that's what counts. Many hobbyists have their own tricks and ways how to take care of fish, how to cure, and like we heard about adding honey to the food. Hey, those are the things we need to have a result with our fish, and there are many ways to do it, and salt is one of them. When it's used properly on the right moment, yes, not as a permanent, but anyway, that's what you learn through your practice, and that really, I learned my profession during practice.
Yeah. On that, do you have an opinion towards marine salt, or pool salt, table salt, rock salt? And is salt a salt, or should it also have those other minerals and things in it?
Okay, yeah. It depends on how long and how much you have to use. The more salt you use and the longer you have to use it for certain reasons or treatments, then you use marine salt. Particularly when you're going in more than 5 grams per liter, and you want to extend it to maybe to control velvet disease, or like the cyprinids can be a problem, then you better use marine salt. Because if you use a lot of salt in the water, like sodium chloride, which is regular table salt, and you're adding a lot, it can shift the pH from 7.58 suddenly to 4.5, and the fish get crazy, they die because of acidification. And that's because it's not buffering the water, the sodium chloride. That's why you have to use marine salt when you use large quantities for a longer time. Yeah. And for smaller amounts, you can just use table salt.
Okay. All right, good one. Atkins Nature Aquarium says his arm is the worst offender for cross-contamination. Have you considered getting additional arms? It might be an option. Can you please ask if I should be worried about feeding from the same food container of dry food and the risk of transferring pathogens that way? And how can I still offer variety without frozen? And I'll throw in live foods as well. So I have a thought on this.
Repeat that question.
Yeah.
Because the same food container, what does that mean?
Yeah, I was thinking about that one while we were having a chat. This is from Bonnie, by the way. And I think, Bonnie, there should be nothing being cross-contaminated unless you're dipping your fingers in the water and then putting those fingers back into more fish food and then into water again. But if your fingers are dry every time, they're not coming into contact with your other aquarium, so it should be okay. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and even that little bit of water would be a problem to become an infection of the fish. The only thing what that little bit of water from your fingers do, it spoils your food.
Yeah, exactly right. You want to keep it dry.
Yes, you have to keep your food dry. That's why we had to buy fish food, the little spoon, to avoid that kind of contact and to dose, to make a kind of dosage way you can dose the food. Yeah. But the thing what is mainly the problem is the feeding of frozen or live food, which is a risk of feeding pathogens to the fish. Yes, it is a fact. Yeah. Even frozen food can have bacteria which are pathogenic, because frozen food does not kill bacteria. Freezing does not kill bacteria.
It's true. I personally, we probably differ on this, and I think that's okay as well. But I like to feed live foods, and I kind of accept that risk, mainly for things like the feeding response. Like if I've got brand new baby CPDs, they might not know what a what a prepared food looks like, but they sure know what a little worm looks like if I feed them some microworms or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
if you're just concerned about the quality you have as live food, that's it. If
Yeah.
you don't know, you take a risk. If you know your quality, you know how to control it.
yeah. But there's certainly a lot of variety within the range of fish food, and we've talked about some of the different ingredients and all those sorts of things. So I think this particular line of fish food is a rare one in that exclusively feeding one brand or line of fish food in this instance still provides a whole lot of variety than you'll get if you pick up, bulk fish food flake, bulk fish food pellet, and bulk fish food sinking wafer. You're going to get a lot of probably fillers, and generic fish meal is going to be what you're going to get in all three of those things. So I won't, you don't have to comment on that, but that's my opinion on why I think this is such a unique thing. And I'm not just saying that because you're in the room with me. So Gil's Fish Room was asking about growth inhibiting hormones when growing out fry. I'm not sure about the context of that one, but can you ask about growth inhibiting hormones when growing out fry? I don't know anything about that.
Where are the hormones coming from, or how are they applied to the fry? Well, I'm not a breeder, so as farmer, or I've been a trader in fish and a biologist, but I've not so much been involved in the breeding of fish. So that might be a very specific issue. I don't know what the meaning of the question is. Yeah.
Craig's Catfish Cave says that he'd like to try the fish food, but it's not available in Taree. You can actually buy it online, and I do have to thank Johan Roo for putting us in contact today. So he is the importer for Dr. Bassleer fish food in Australia, and you can buy it. Look at this. Look what I've pre-prepared earlier. It's like the news. He's going to give 25% off orders for the next 48 hours on his website if you use the code DRP. So I'll let that run for the remainder of the stream. And I am conscious that we've gone for an hour and 20 minutes nearly. So I'll try not to take up too much of your time, but it's absolutely been gold. So I'll try and get some last questions if that's okay, and we'll wrap up shortly. The honey was directly applied to the wound. Oh yeah, that was one thing I was wondering about. What's your philosophy about medicating food versus medicating water? I mean, obviously you have a lot of experience with disease and food, so I think there's no better person to ask that question.
It all depends on the disease, on the pathogen. If it's a pathogen that distributes through the water to other fish, then you have to treat the water.
Yeah.
Particularly white spot and oedenium are a typical thing that you have to kill the larval stage of the parasite, which is transmitting to other fish. So you have to put it in the water.
Yeah.
In my experience, that feeding fish food with a medication, you never know how much medicine the fish will take up. If the fish is very sick, he will hardly eat. So you will hardly have any medication, coming to him. And that's why in general in the industry and aquaculture, particularly in the ornamental fish industry, people are treating the water because most of the diseases are distributed through the water, and most of the medications used are absorbed through the skin and the gills of the fish and taken up, and they can control also internal problems. The ideal combination is to put some medication, like for instance metronidazole or praziquantel for worms, or metronidazole for parasites, Spironucleus, hexameta, into the water and into the food. So you have a double action.
Okay.
The problem with mixing those medications into the food, that sometimes the fish do not like it. Like metronidazole, if you put it in the food, fish do not like to touch the food. It has a bitter taste.
Mm.
So we always recommend, well, combining them, for example, with garlic. Or use the biofish food garlic and adding on in that granulated food, mixing on top of it the metronidazole. The fish will more likely eat it than if not. So it depends on the disease, but in our practice, particularly pet shop or a wholesaler or importer, we use medicating of the water.
Yeah.
Because the pathogens are in the water are usually most of the diseases. Eventually, what the fish die from is the gill damage. We don't see. But usually when the fish has a parasitic or bacterial infection, at the end, it's like the gills that are broken or damaged or eaten away by bacteria. And you can compare it with humans. Why did most of the people die from COVID-19? Because of lung infections, pneumonia, a secondary bacterial infections, which came after a viral infection. That's why they need to have, as soon as possible, a good antibiotic to control the bacterial infection in the lungs. And the same counts for the fish. That's where usually the fish will suffer from and die from, is the bacterial infections in the gills that occur after a parasitic disease or during a bacterial infection they have. So that's why if you put it in the water, you also treat the gills, which you cannot see. And that's why it's so commonly practiced in our ornamental fish industry.
Yeah, it's good confirmation, because I always thought that there's just too much variability when you're medicating the fish food, especially, I mean, it's all well and good if there's one fish in the tank, but if you have 10 fish in the tank, how do you guarantee that each one of those is going to eat the same amount of each thing? Or are you going to just have one big bully just eating it all up? Or, you know, and then
maybe that bully is not sick, it's the other ones are sick, and he's taking up all the food and he doesn't need it.
Exactly. So I agree with that. I do have a question here from Craig about pumpkin. In your experiments, in your travels, did you have any experience with pumpkin as a natural wormer? He's asking about specifically about deworming, but I'm also interested in it as a enhancement for color due to the carotenoids. I presume are going to be helpful to bring out reds and yellows and stuff like that.
You mentioned the pumpkin seed extract to get some comments on that.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Well, pumpkin seed extract is known for in aquaculture to be used into the food to make it more difficult for the worms to stay in the gut. Okay. So it helps to expel, how can I say, helps to expel the guts, the parasites from the gut, particularly the worms. Right. And there are some, I have in my website, you can find references of scientific studies on biofish food, and you can look up there on pumpkin seed extract what experiments and what science has been published on that subject. So I have a specific chapter in my biofish food topic. There is some studies, references that you can look up, and there you can find some more details on, for example, pumpkin seed extract, why it has been used and how it has been used. That's how I also collect my information, what I can use on tropical fish, because it has been tested, has been used in aquaculture. I do not invent the wheel.
True. Yeah, it's one of those things that I think is ever evolving, right? That like people are continually fine tuning and getting better and better at these kind of things. Along that line, are you seeing that diseases and pathogens are changing? You know, kind of like every year there's a different influenza that's got a slightly different tweak. Is it the same with fish in an aquaria, or is it pretty much the same?
Well, one of the problems we are facing, and we also know by mankind, is the excessive use of antibiotics that creates a risk of having bacterial strains that are resistant to that treatment. And due to certain practices which are not well performed by certain breeders, they are cultivating fish with resistant pathogens, particularly resistant bacteria. And that is a serious problem which we face as importer or as pet shop or as hobbyists, that certain bacteria, well, can have a difficulty to become controlled by the current antibiotics available. That is a problem. And the second problem is breeding of fish. Well, it's more and more going on in our industry. It's also a risk of breeding diseases. So in certain breeders, they breed certain fish, but also certain diseases. So it's important for the importer of the pet shop to learn to detect which breeder supplies me which kind of problem. And so you can handle the problem, or you can avoid buying that fish with that problem. So that is something we learn in our industry we should be aware of. And from nature, we know from nature that certain periods of the year that, like the Corydora cats, the wild Corydora cats, come in with more worms in certain seasons, certain river systems, because there is more food available with larvae of worms, more risk. So there's also a seasonal change in diseases we should be aware of. But it depends on the origin, the river, the kind of fish. It's not a real fact. It's always January or always March. No, it can change depending on many reasons, what kind of food at that moment the fish has to eat and how bad that food is, or because he has no choice in nature. He cannot select. He eats what he can get. That's a survival.
Interesting. I like this one as well from Andrew. Can you feed too much garlic to aquarium fish? Is there such a thing as too much of any of these great ingredients?
I never heard about it. But to mention about too much feeding, in general, people feeding too much, that's a problem. People are feeding so much there. Oh, they must have big bellies. Forget it. You're making obese fish.
Yeah.
And you know what obese means for health? You're creating a big risk for bacterial infections. Very big risk.
Yeah.
So try to feed as much as the fish eat within a couple of minutes. That's it. 2 times a day. That's my recommendation. In the morning, and meanwhile watch your fish, because the fish talks to you by his body language and his colors he sells to you. So watch your fish during the feeding and after the feeding, and if all the fish are coming to eat or not. That's the first sign to see if some problem appears. And feed it twice, and also feed it in the early evening, not in the late evening, in the early evening, and try to watch your fish during eating and after eating. The fish will tell you if they're healthy. It's a really important 5 minutes a day you need to spend as hobbyists.
Yeah. And I think especially if you keep unheated aquariums, or in here there is an element of seasonality. It's definitely cooler over winter and warmer over summer, and I do notice that they demand a different amount of fish food in the summer versus the winter. And even I've started incorporating a fair few days of no feeding, like once or twice a week, and haven't seen any ill effects. Obviously not for fry and small fish, but
but for adult fish, it's recommended to stop to just feed, no feeding 1 day a week. No feeding. You'd be surprised. I've seen people not feeding their fish at all, and fish doing well, because the fish eat permanently through the absorption through the gills. It collects floating nutrients in the water. You'd be surprised how much is still left over after feeding and still floating into the water that continually are taken up.
Yeah. And I think that it helps to keep the aquarium cleaner too, because, they do sort of clean the filter a little bit when they get a bit hungry, and, go and break things down further and further to what they might have otherwise if you've got the conveyor belt of Big Macs coming in.
Yeah, but the highest mortality I see in a hobby is people are overfeeding the fish. And of course also overfeeding the filter, and the filter cannot handle it, and there's a lot of excess debris on the substrate or in the filter. it accumulates the problems, and that's why I see a lot of problems appearing of too much food given to the fish.
I saw that the code is apparently not working. It might not be valid for a little while. I'll have a chat to Johan after this. I can see him working the keyboard. He's onto it. So hold tight on that one. But let me just see. I'll just pick perhaps one last question, and then we'll see how we go. I should have been... I've been pretty good with pre-preparing the questions as we go, but...
I want to answer on the garlic, because the question was also overfeeding garlic to the fish,
Yeah.
I've not had no idea that any negative comments came when somebody had too much garlic to the fish or giving that as a problem. I don't know. Even for mankind, is there a limit in eating garlic? I have no idea.
I'm not sure. Perhaps just don't feed it to vampire tetras. That's a terrible dad joke. This is a good one. So we were talking before about the growth inhibiting hormone, and we weren't really sure. So Gil's provided a bit more context here in that some species are hypothesized to produce growth inhibiting hormone, hence why you have problems if you add small discus to a tank with adult discus. Does it change how their growth patterns are happening? Is that something that you've come across before, or
no? I have not been a farmer or a breeder in that direction, so I heard about it. That's all. That it might be having an influence on a population in an aquarium, but I have personally no experience. I have to say, I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question.
That's okay. Well, yeah, we've gone 1.5 hours. Can't thank you enough for your time, and it's been really great. We've pretty much had steadily 50 people in here live the entire time, so very captivating stuff, and I'm sure that everybody is really thankful for that, and I certainly am. So I've been trying out the biofish food for quite a while now, and I really like it, and it's great to see stuff like this coming into the country, and it's been great to understand a bit more about yourself and what went into producing what we have here today, but also your experience as a biologist and that sort of journey too. So thanks so much. I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you, Blake, and I appreciate your time of helping the hobby to be more successful. And is there any important questions coming in the next coming days? I'm willing to answer through YouTube or what else, or through Messenger to help out that peoples get rid of their headaches.
Perfect. I appreciate that. I'll drop the links down below. So yeah, perhaps if people are watching the replay over the next few days, put your comments down there and we'll try and get them answered. Alternatively, you have your own channel and website, which I'll have linked in a pinned comment down there. And as well as that, again, big thank you to Johan for providing me with the food to try out before connecting us and making today happen. So big thanks to dipaquatics.com.au as well. And just great all around. So thanks everyone. Catch you on the next one. And thanks for watching.
Thank you. Bye-bye.